Hello. Today my story is about a United States naval officer, a man who's buried between two presidents. And it seems to me that almost nobody outside of academia has really ever heard of him. He was probably one of the most important persons who contributed to navigation and the knowledge of our planet's oceans. My name is Captain Mike Taylor, and I'm a docent at the Whaling Museum. Welcome to another tale about a favorite item of mine, and which, in some small fashion, relates to my other two stories. Before I start, there's one thing this gentleman and I had in common: seasickness, at least at the start of our career. When you enter our Turner Sperm Whale Gallery, to the wall on your right, you'll find a large chart with the world's oceans highlighted in 3 colors. I know they're pale, but this chart, after all, is a copy of one made in the early 1800s. It shows the distribution of 2 types of commercial whales, and where they also might be found together. However, to me, the most interesting feature is on the top left-hand corner and the name of Lieutenant Matthew Fontaine Maury. Lieutenant, later Commander Maury, was known as the father of modern oceanography and naval metrology. And for myself, a retired merchant Navy officer, his studies and investigations would play an important part in our lives at sea. I'd like you to step back about 170 years ago, when our commercial world was powered by wind and the great sailing fleets that carried cargoes of all kinds from these shores and across to Europe and all around the world, and brought other goods back. And along with Murray's help, brought this nation to fame. First, a little bit about our lieutenant. He was born in 1806 near Fredericksburg in Virginia. He died in 1873. An accident to his back in his youth prevented him from working full-time on the family farm. So his father sent him away to school. Here he excelled, became the first in all his classes. Maury was desperate to go away to sea and follow in the footsteps of his brother, Flag Lieutenant John Maury. Unfortunately, John died having contacted yellow fever at sea and was buried at sea. Maury's father was deeply concerned that his son might contact a similar fate and refused to allow him to join the Navy. However, a family friend, Representative Samuel Houston, who later became the President of the Republic of Texas, convinced the family and found Maury a naval appointment. Maury collected information constantly regarding the sea and navigation on his voyages. He later sailed on the first U.S. Navy circumnavigation of the world on board the USS Vincennes. Promoted to sailing master with the responsibility of planning his vessel's chart routing and the various navigational instruments, as well as maintaining the voyage logbook, he sought literary information about wind and weather, only to find none available. It became his lifetime's ambition to correct this. During his voyages, he collected weather information both at sea and ashore, which he would incorporate in his first authorized paper regarding the rounding of the Horn. Bowditch and Norrie were the standard training literature of the time, but required certain information not always available, as well as being very complicated and time-consuming. He also noted many mistakes in those publications. He recognized the use of spherical trigonometry was the real answer to finding your position at sea, and supposedly practiced this with cannonballs on board, which his book was later to become the standard book on navigation, known as the American Practical Navigator. Setting off to join a ship, he took a stagecoach ride, which was to change his life. Always a gentleman, he offered his seat to a lady passenger and sat on the roof of the carriage. The coach overturned, and Maury suffered serious fractures to his leg, many of which then prevented him from returning to sea. During his recovery, Maury wrote under an assumed name regarding the corruption within the Navy and the sad lack of proper navigational training. His work was unpopular with the powers, but gained him fame with most of his fellow officers. Later, his knowledge recognized, and being pronounced reasonably fit, Maury was appointed in charge of the Navy's Department of Charts and Instruments in Washington. This building would one day become the National Observatory. The department's buildings were a depository for thousands and thousands of ships' logbooks, from vessels of all types, including whaling vessels. And these proved fertile ground for study, as they included a daily position, weather, and sometimes seawater temperatures, as well as many other observations. Maury, in studying these logbooks, realized he could condense all this information into wind and weather charts, and that it would be beneficial to the marine world. He came up with the idea of dividing the world's oceans into 5-degree blocks. That is, 5 degrees of latitude and 5 degrees of longitude. Into each, he placed a compass rose with its 16 points. These were further subdivided into 3 layers of 3 months, into which he placed the wind forces he noted from logbooks. Included on the published chart was another circle, which showed months. A simple circle cut out of cardboard with a notch was then placed over the compass points in the direction the master wished to go, and he could read the winds to be expected and how to take advantage of them. To gather more information, Maury provided mariners with his charts free, always providing that a log, also supplied, was maintained daily and returned to Washington. Ships used these charts saved considerable time at sea. For instance, a normal trip to San Francisco, don't forget round the Horn in those days, took some 120 days, but using Maury's wind chart, you could save almost a third of the time, with one record passage of 97 days. Interestingly, some old captains stuck to their old ways and still recorded in the logbook, which he had supplied. This went further to prove that by keeping to Maori's routes, they would save considerable amount of time. In coordination with this was a solution to marine accidents when crossing the North Atlantic, which frequently occurred between steam vessels as well as sail vessels, who shared opposing routes. He came up with the idea of sea lanes. Vessels sailing to Europe were to the north, and returning came via a southern route. All depended upon seasonal weather, of course. Sailing vessels were advised to stay on either side of these sea lanes. Accidents dramatically dropped. Whilst he came up with many ideas, one which did become a first in 1858. He had helped to make a sea bottom survey between Britain and the United States, which became later a sensible route for the first transatlantic cable. In that year, Queen Victoria spoke by Morse code to President Buchanan. In compiling the information for our whale chart, he was surprised to note of many entries regarding salvaged harpoons. They had been used on lost whales hunted in the Bering Sea, but finally captured in Baffin Bay, but also in reverse. He surmised, since whales are air-breathing animals, then they must be an open access across the top of Canada, as these northern whales are not known to pass round the Horn or Good Hope. His reasoning strengthened the idea which led to many expeditions searching for the Northwest Passage, and which in turn is how we come to have one of the Resolute desks at our museum. I previously talked about that one. With the advent of war between the North and the South, Maori left his Washington position to play his part in the conflict and move back to Virginia. He was sent abroad to solicit European help in the battle between the two sides, in acquiring warships and supplies for the South. At this time, he developed an electric torpedo, which was to create the most damage to Union vessels than any other means. When the Civil War was over, Maori, because of his rank and his contribution to the South, was not allowed amnesty, and so left for Mexico and finally ended up in England. Eventually, he did return, and he was granted amnesty by President Jackson. He then took a position at Virginia Military Institute. In 1873, he died. His final resting place lies between Presidents Monroe and Tyler in the Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia. I did manage to find a 6th edition of Maori's Physical Geography of the Sea, dated 1858, which, when I purchased, I knew it was not as valuable as the first edition of 1855. However, as my luck would have it, when I opened it, I saw that it had come from the library of Charles Nordhoff. Nordhoff, you may remember, was the author of the Bounty Trilogy, and from which the 1932 Mutiny on the Bounty film was made, and along with others. It's wonderful to think that Nordhoff used my book for his research. In another favorite item of mine, I talk about the Cosmos, a whale factory ship painting in Birkenhead, Liverpool, which hangs on the wall in the same gallery as our chart. Coincidentally, Maori was presented with the Cosmos Medal of Humboldt, a gold medal of science by Emperor Maximilian. He also got many, many, many other awards, as well as some knighthoods. As you may see, that this and my previous efforts on our museum site, that if you dig deep enough with what you see on our walls, you can find a little bit of each in the other subjects. And I think it is this that what fascinates me most about our Whaling Museum. Should you wish to learn more about Matthew Fontaine Maury and see some of his weather charts, please visit us at the Whaling Museum. Thank you.